In 2019, they opened Carlo Acutis' grave. He'd been dead for 13 years. They expected bones, maybe some fabric. What they found was a body that looked like it had been buried yesterday, perfectly intact, a 15-year-old boy in jeans and sneakers who looked asleep. Today, you can visit his body in Assisi, Italy. Thousands do every week. They're staring at a millennial saint, the first one the church has ever canonized. But here's the real mystery. Carlo wasn't special. No visions, no miracles during his lifetime. Just an ordinary kid who discovered something in his local church that he called his highway to heaven. Before he died at 15, Carlo said those exact words, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." Not a side road, not a scenic route, a highway, the fastest possible path from earth to God. And when you understand what he meant by that, when you see what Carlo experienced that made him say those words, everything about faith, about struggle, about becoming holy will suddenly make sense. Stay with me, because the answer isn't what you think. But before Carlo could find his highway, he had to start in the most unlikely place imaginable. Because if you wanted to design the worst environment for producing a saint, Carlo's childhood would be pretty close to perfect. His mother Antonia later admitted something that shocked everyone. Before Carlo was born, she had been to Mass exactly 3 times in her entire adult life. Her first communion, her confirmation, her wedding, that was it. 3 times. His father Andrea worked in banking in Milan, one of the most secular, materialistic cities in Europe. They were wealthy, comfortable, sophisticated, the kind of Catholics who maybe showed up on Christmas if they felt like it, but religion wasn't part of their daily reality. It wasn't even part of their yearly reality. And yet, from the moment this child could speak, something impossible started happening. Carlo was obsessed with God. Not in a normal, kids are curious way. Obsessed. He asked questions about Jesus that his parents couldn't answer because they didn't know the answers. He was drawn to churches like they had some magnetic pull on him. His mother couldn't explain where any of this was coming from. They weren't teaching him. They weren't praying with him. They didn't own religious books. It was as if Carlo had arrived on earth already knowing something, some secret the rest of us had forgotten. And then came June 16, 1998, the day that secret became impossible to ignore. Carlo was 7 years old when he received his first communion. 7. Most kids that age are thinking about the party, the cake, the presents. It's a photo opportunity, a milestone you barely remember. But something happened to Carlo during that Mass that ripped his world open. He experienced what he would later describe as an encounter with Jesus Christ himself, not a feeling, not a nice moment, but an actual encounter with someone who was really, substantially, impossibly present in that piece of bread. And the next morning, Carlo made a decision that terrified his parents. He announced he was going to Mass every single day for the rest of his life. Think about that. A 7-year-old boy in modern Milan, with parents who don't even go to Sunday Mass, just declared he needs church every single day. Not wants, needs. Like his life depends on it. His mother later confessed the truth. It wasn't us dragging Carlo to Mass. Carlo dragged us. Morning after morning after morning, this child would wake up early, get himself ready, and insist they take him. The kid was converting his own parents. But why? What could a 7-year-old have possibly experienced that made him desperate to return every single day? What did Carlo find in that church that the rest of us keep missing? Because Carlo wasn't just attending Mass out of obligation. He wasn't trying to be good. He wasn't performing religion for anyone. He had discovered something that made everything else in life look like a shadow. Carlo would spend hours kneeling in Eucharistic adoration, before the monstrance, in front of random tabernacles in churches he passed. While his friends obsessed over popularity and PlayStation, Carlo obsessed over being in the presence of someone he claimed was actually there. And because he was growing up in the digital age, Carlo started writing about what he'd found. This tech-savvy kid who taught himself programming began documenting his discovery on his computer. That's where we get the words that would define his entire life. The Eucharist is my highway to heaven, my autostrada. Now here's why that word matters. In Italian, autostrada doesn't just mean highway. It means the fastest possible route between 2 points. No stops, no detours, no traffic lights. When you're on the autostrada, you're going directly to your destination at maximum speed. So when Carlo called the Eucharist his autostrada to heaven, he wasn't being poetic. He was making a claim. He was saying, I found the direct route. I found the shortcut that bypasses years of struggle and gets you there fast. But here's what you need to understand, and this is the part most Catholics have completely forgotten. Carlo wrote these exact words. When we take communion, Jesus pauses among us for 15 minutes, hidden in the form of bread. Do you hear what he's saying? He's not saying Jesus blesses you from heaven. He's not saying you feel close to God for a moment. He's saying Jesus enters your body, the God who created galaxies, the God who holds atoms together, the God who spoke light into existence. That God is inside you, physically, substantially, actually there, for 15 minutes while the host dissolves in your stomach. Body, blood, soul, divinity, not symbolic, not metaphorical, actually present. Carlo believed this with every cell in his body, and that belief didn't just change his mind, it changed everything. Because once Carlo started living like Jesus was actually inside him every single day, he became something this world has almost never seen. This kid growing up in secular Milan started giving his money away to homeless people, not occasionally, constantly. His mother would watch him empty his entire wallet without thinking twice. He tutored struggling classmates instead of hanging out. He defended bullied kids, even when it cost him friendships. In a culture drowning in pornography, Carlo remained pure because he understood something. His body was a temple, and God was literally dwelling there. And everyone noticed something else, something they couldn't quite explain. Carlo was happy, genuinely, deeply, impossibly happy. Not fake Instagram happiness, not forced positivity, real joy that seemed to come from somewhere outside himself. He had the same pressures as everyone else: school, social dynamics, teenage stress. But Carlo was drawing from a different source. Then, when he was 11 years old, Carlo did something that proved he understood exactly what he'd found. Using his self-taught computer skills, he built a website documenting over 150 Eucharistic miracles from across history. Cases where the consecrated host had physically transformed into human flesh and blood. Scientifically verified, still existing today, like the miracle in Lanciano, Italy, where an 8th century host turned into cardiac tissue that still exists 1,200 years later. No preservatives. Scientists tested it. Human heart tissue, AB blood type, the same blood type found on the Shroud of Turin. Or Buenos Aires in 1996, where a discarded host developed into living human heart tissue, showing signs of severe trauma, as if the person had been beaten. The cardiologist who analyzed it said, "This tissue is from someone who was alive when the sample was taken." It had been sitting in water in a church. Carlo collected these stories because he was trying to answer one burning question: how do I make people see what I see? How do I make them understand that this isn't symbolic, this isn't metaphorical, this is God making himself physically available to enter your body every single day? He wrote, "The more Eucharist we receive, the more we will become like Jesus, so that on this earth we will have a foretaste of heaven." A foretaste of heaven, not someday, not after death, right now, today, through the Eucharist. That's what Carlo was experiencing. That's why he called it a highway. Because every single day he was getting closer to heaven, not by traveling after death, but by bringing heaven into himself, 15 minutes at a time. But then something happened that would test whether Carlo's highway was real or just the beautiful dream of an idealistic teenager. In 2006, Carlo started feeling sick. At first it seemed minor, but the symptoms got worse. His parents took him to the hospital. The doctors ran tests, then more tests. The diagnosis came back like a death sentence: acute leukemia, aggressive, advanced. Carlo Acutis, at 15 years old, was dying. This is where we see whether Carlo's highway to heaven was real, because anyone can have faith when life is good. Anyone can be religious when nothing hurts. But what happens when God allows everything to fall apart? What happens when your highway to heaven suddenly runs straight through hell? Carlo's response revealed everything. He didn't rage. He didn't fall into despair. He didn't demand to know why God was doing this to him. Instead, Carlo offered his suffering for Pope Benedict XVI and for the Church. He said he wanted his pain to have meaning, to be united with Christ's suffering. Even as leukemia ravaged his body, even as he was dying, Carlo continued seeking Jesus in the Eucharist for as long as he could physically receive it. Less than a week after being hospitalized, on October 12, 2006, Carlo died. His mother said that before the end, Carlo told her something that explained his entire life. "I'm not afraid of death. I've been preparing for it my whole life by being close to Jesus." By worldly standards, his death was a tragedy. 15 years old, life cut short, never graduated high school, never went to college, never got married or had kids. But Carlo had traveled further on his highway to heaven in 15 years than most people do in 80. Because he had found the shortcut, and he had taken it every single day. The story should end there. But it doesn't, because what happened next proved that Carlo's highway to heaven wasn't just a metaphor. Carlo was buried in Assisi, the city of St. Francis. His funeral was packed with people whose lives he'd touched. Then the years passed. Life went on, but Carlo's website about Eucharistic miracles kept spreading worldwide. His parents, the ones who barely went to Mass, continued attending daily. They were still on the highway their son had shown them. Then came January 23, 2019, 13 years after Carlo's death. The Church was considering him for beatification, which required exhuming his body. They opened his grave expecting bones and decay. Normal decomposition, the natural process of death. What they found was impossible. Carlo's body was incorrupt, perfectly preserved. After 13 years in the ground, he looked like he'd been buried yesterday. His skin, his features, everything intact in a way that simply doesn't happen. Today you can visit the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore in Assisi and see him yourself. He's in a glass case, dressed in jeans and sneakers, looking like a teenager who just fell asleep. Thousands visit every week. They stare at this millennial saint and ask the same question: how? In 2020, the Church beatified him. The required miracle? A 6-year-old Brazilian boy with a fatal pancreatic disorder was completely healed after his mother prayed for Carlo's intercession right before receiving the Eucharist. The doctors had no explanation, one day dying, the next day healed. Then, in 2025, Carlo Acutis was canonized. Saint Carlo Acutis, the first millennial saint in history, a teenager in Nikes elevated to the altars. But here's what makes his canonization different from every other saint you've heard about. Carlo didn't perform miracles during his lifetime. He didn't have visions. He didn't levitate during prayer. He wasn't martyred for his faith. He just went to Mass every day. He spent time in Eucharistic adoration. He believed what Jesus said, "This is my body," and he lived accordingly. That's it. That's how Carlo became a saint. And now you can finally understand why he called the Eucharist his highway to heaven. Because every other path to holiness takes decades, years of prayer, years of struggle, years of slowly, painfully becoming more like Christ through discipline and effort and failure and trying again. But Carlo found the shortcut. When you receive the Eucharist, you're not just getting a blessing, you're not just remembering Jesus. You're receiving Jesus himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity, into your physical body. God enters you, dwells in you, unites with you completely. For those 15 minutes, heaven and earth are united inside your body. The distance between you and God collapses to zero. You are, in the most literal sense possible, bringing heaven into yourself. That's why it's a highway, because you're not slowly traveling toward heaven over years. You're arriving there every single day, 15 minutes at a time, through Holy Communion. Every reception of the Eucharist transforms you more into Christ. Every moment of adoration pulls you deeper into union with God. Carlo understood something most Catholics have forgotten. The Eucharist isn't just a nice ritual. It's not just a symbol. It's the fastest, most direct, most powerful way to become holy that exists. You want to be a saint? Stop looking for complicated spiritual techniques. Stop searching for the secret. Carlo found it. It's been sitting in every Catholic church for 2,000 years, waiting for someone to take it seriously. The Eucharist is the highway to heaven, and it's open right now. Here's what makes Carlo's story so uncomfortable for the rest of us. He had access to the exact same Eucharist you do, the same Jesus in the tabernacle, the same Mass, the same grace available in communion. The only difference is that Carlo believed it. Really, completely. Stake his entire life on it, believed it. Surveys show most Catholics today think the Eucharist is just symbolic, just bread that represents Jesus, a nice memorial. Carlo didn't believe that. He believed what Jesus actually said. This is my body. Not represents, not symbolizes, is. And that belief transformed him from an ordinary teenager into a saint in 15 years. The same transformation is available to you, not because you're special, because the same Jesus who transformed Carlo Acutis, who preserved his body, who made him a saint, who is using his story to bring millions back to the Eucharist, is present in your parish right now. Carlo once said, "Sadness is looking at ourselves, happiness is looking at God." And where did Carlo look at God most clearly? In the Eucharist. Every day, for 15 minutes, on the highway to heaven. The highway to heaven that Carlo discovered isn't closed. It didn't disappear when he died. It's not reserved for special people. It runs through every Catholic church in the world, through every tabernacle, through every Mass where bread and wine become really, truly, substantially become the body and blood of Christ. Carlo found that highway when he was 7 years old. He got on it and never got off. He traveled it with joy, with passion, with absolute conviction. And when death came at 15, Carlo wasn't afraid. He'd been arriving at heaven 15 minutes at a time, every single day, through Holy Communion. The same highway is open to you, right now, today. The same Jesus who transformed a Milan teenager with a PlayStation is waiting in your parish tabernacle, ready to transform you too. Carlo called it his highway to heaven because that's exactly what it was, and what it still is. The only question left is, will you get on it?